Emma always believed her marriage was built on an unshakable foundation. 8 years with Daniel had been steady, comforting, and rooted in trust that never needed to be questioned. He was the kind of husband who noticed when she was tired, who carried the heavier bags, who remembered the little things like how she liked her tea. Their life had become predictable, but in that predictability was safety. She told herself that even if the fire of passion had dimmed over the years, the warmth of his presence was enough to sustain her. She admired his loyalty and his devotion, yet there were moments, late at night, when she stared at the ceiling and wondered if she had somehow disappeared into the routine they had built together. Those quiet thoughts of restlessness had grown louder lately. Work drained her energy, and Daniel's focus on his career left her craving more connection. It wasn't that he stopped loving her, but that the love had settled into something less visible, less exciting. She told herself it was normal, that every marriage evolved, but the emptiness gnawed at her in subtle ways. She longed for someone to notice her not just as a partner in life but as a woman who still wanted to feel desired. She never voiced this to Daniel. Why would she? He had never given her reason to doubt him or their relationship. And yet, silence can be a dangerous companion. It lets the unspoken needs fester. Daniel thought of her constantly, even in ways that she overlooked. When she complained of the tension in her shoulders and how exhausted she felt, he immediately searched for solutions. That was how he found the spa, booked the appointment, and presented it as a thoughtful surprise. He wanted her to relax, to feel cared for, to have a day that reminded her of the attention she deserved. His gesture, pure in intention, made her smile because it reflected his kindness. She thanked him with genuine affection, not realizing that this gift would set into motion the moment that changed everything. When she arrived at the spa, she carried no expectations beyond relief from the tightness in her back and the dull ache in her neck. The place was serene, filled with muted scents of lavender and soft ambient music. She wanted nothing more than to let go of the stress she had been carrying. And then Adrian entered. He introduced himself in a professional manner, calm voice, steady presence, the kind of man trained to make people feel at ease. There was nothing overt about him at first glance, simply polite, focused, and skilled at his craft. As his hands began their work, Emma felt the kind of release that came from touch without words. Muscles softened, breath deepened, mind slowed. It was precisely what Daniel had hoped for her. But over time, something subtle shifted. The strokes lingered just a little longer than expected, the pauses between movements filled with an energy she couldn't ignore. She told herself it was imagination, that a trained professional's hands might feel more intimate than they were meant to. Still, she noticed how the room seemed to grow quieter, how her awareness sharpened in ways that had nothing to do with relaxation. Adrian never crossed the obvious lines, not yet. But his tone lowered when he asked if the pressure was right, his fingertips pressed in a way that seemed intentional, as though testing how she might respond. Emma's instinct was to dismiss it, to stay still, to convince herself that she was simply reading too much into it. She had come here for relief, not attention, and certainly not temptation. And yet, she could not deny the unfamiliar spark that flickered inside her, a spark that frightened her because it felt so alive. She thought of Daniel, the man who had arranged this for her. Guilt touched her chest at even noticing anything unusual, but she buried it quickly, reasoning that nothing was happening. Still, she remembered how long it had been since anyone looked at her the way she imagined Adrian might be looking, even if she couldn't see his eyes. The smallest gestures now carried meaning that her mind struggled to resist assigning weight to. By the time the session neared its end, Emma felt more unsettled than she had in months. Her body was loose, but her thoughts tangled. She couldn't shake the awareness that boundaries had been brushed against, not broken but dangerously close. She told herself that she had done nothing wrong, that she had simply received the gift her husband had offered. But the memory of how Adrian's touch seemed to hover at the edge of something forbidden stayed with her long after she left the spa. When she walked back into her home that evening, Daniel greeted her warmly, asking how it went. She smiled, reassured him that it was wonderful, and thanked him again. Her voice was steady, but inside she replayed moments she wished she could erase. His trust in her eyes made the flicker of unease even sharper. She wrapped her arms around him, holding on a little longer than usual, as though her embrace could cover the shadow of something she refused to name. It was supposed to have ended there, an afternoon of release, nothing more. But Emma knew, deep inside, that something had shifted. What she carried home with her was not only the calm of a massage but the seed of a temptation she had never sought, one she now feared would grow into something she could no longer contain. Emma told herself she would forget about the strange tension from the spa, that the memory would fade like steam off her skin. But the truth settled in heavier with each passing day. She thought of Adrian more often than she admitted, not in full detail but in fragments, and the way his voice had lowered, the way his touch had lingered just long enough to stir something she hadn't felt in years. She despised herself for even remembering, yet the memory became a quiet echo in her mind. It wasn't supposed to matter, and yet it did. When Daniel suggested she return for another session, she hesitated. She wanted to refuse, to protect herself from what she knew lingered there, but she couldn't explain why without raising questions she wasn't ready to answer. So she smiled, said yes, and told herself it was harmless. That lie sat on her tongue like poison, but it was easier to swallow than the truth. The next time she lay on that table, she felt her pulse quicken before anything began. Adrian greeted her with the same calm professionalism, yet she sensed the familiarity between them, the kind that blurred lines too easily. His hands began their careful work, and she knew instantly that the boundary she had clung to before was thinner now. She wanted to resist, to remind herself who she was, but the loneliness that had been gnawing at her found its answer in every calculated touch. At first, she rationalized it. She told herself she was simply allowing space for relaxation, that it meant nothing more. But her body betrayed her, softening too quickly, responding too eagerly. She closed her eyes, and in that darkness, she allowed herself to surrender, not fully at once, but inch by inch, justification by justification. Adrian pressed against the edges of what was acceptable, and she stopped pulling back. Each time she might have spoken, she chose silence. Each silence became consent. She remembered Daniel in fragments, the way he looked at her, the way he trusted her. The thought sliced at her, but she numbed it with the excuse that this was different, separate, that it did not take away what she had with him. She convinced herself that this wasn't betrayal if it stayed locked away, if it never touched her marriage beyond these walls. It was a dangerous lie, one she wanted to believe more than she wanted to be faithful. The moment she let go completely felt less like a decision and more like falling into a current she had been resisting for too long. Adrian leaned into the space she had left open, and she didn't push him away. The contact that followed shattered the thin shield of self-control she had been clinging to. Her heart pounded, guilt thrashed inside her, but another part of her, the part starved of being seen, of being desired, drowned out everything else. For the first time in years, she felt wanted not for being a wife or a partner, but as a woman. That fleeting validation was enough to silence her conscience, even if only for a moment. When it was over, the weight of what she had done pressed down instantly. Her breath came shallow, her hands trembled, and she wished she could reverse time. Adrian moved with casual ease, as if this had all been expected, while Emma sat trapped in the cage of her own choices. She told herself it was a mistake, a lapse, a single moment that would never be repeated. She promised herself Daniel would never know. But even as she made that vow, she felt the hollow ache of knowing that something had changed forever. Walking out of the spa, she tried to compose herself. She checked her reflection, fixed her hair, straightened her clothes, desperate to erase any sign of what had happened. To the world outside, she was the same woman, but inside she carried a crack that could not be sealed. Every step toward home felt like walking deeper into betrayal. Daniel greeted her with his usual warmth, his smile untouched by suspicion. She forced a smile in return, her voice steady though her chest was tight. She hugged him, kissed his cheek, told him she was fine. But in that closeness, the contrast between his innocent trust and her hidden guilt cut sharper than anything Adrian's touch had stirred. That night, she lay awake beside Daniel, listening to his even breathing, his hand resting lightly over hers. She stared into the dark, replaying what she had done until it became unbearable. The betrayal pulsed inside her, faceless yet undeniable. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, and though Daniel slept peacefully, she knew the fracture in their marriage had already begun. What terrified her most was not just that she had betrayed him, but how easily she had allowed it to happen, how quickly she had silenced her conscience when temptation called. She told herself she would bury it, that it would remain their secret, hers and Adrian's. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and Emma could already feel the weight of hers tightening around her chest, waiting for the moment it would no longer stay hidden.
Understood. Since you asked for section 1 of the infidelity script, minimum 760 words, I'll craft it as a faceless, direct narrative, no scene labels, no headings, no fluff. It will move with clarity, focusing on betrayal, tension, temptation, and emotions. Here's section 1, almost equals 760 words. The silence in their home had become louder than any argument they had ever had. Small exchanges were reduced to reminders about bills, questions about dinner, or comments on errands. Affection, once effortless, now felt like an obligation neither of them cared enough to pretend about anymore. He noticed how she smiled more at her phone than she did at him. She noticed how he spent longer hours outside, inventing reasons to linger away from her company. Both of them sensed the distance, but neither addressed it, because naming it would make it real, and neither had the strength to confront the truth. Head-on.it began innocently, or at least that was the excuse she whispered to herself the first few times. A colleague at work, Daniel, seemed to notice her in ways her husband no longer did. His compliments were subtle, never over the line, but the way his eyes lingered, the way his attention felt heavy on her, made her pulse race in ways she hadn't felt in years. She told herself she enjoyed the validation, nothing more. A little spark in an otherwise dim routine, harmless, controlled, manageable. But sparks, left unchecked, always threatened to become fire. When he first touched her wrist, it wasn't deliberate. Papers exchanged, fingers brushing, the warmth of his skin against hers. It should have meant nothing, yet she carried the ghost of that contact all day. She replayed it during dinner, while nodding absently to her husband's half-hearted recount of his day, her mind elsewhere. She felt alive, and guilty, but the guilt only deepened the thrill. That's how it always begins, the intoxicating mix of wrongness and desire. Meanwhile, her husband wasn't innocent either. He had grown close to someone too, though in a different way. A woman from the gym, Elena, with whom he shared long conversations before and after workouts. She laughed at his jokes, asked him about his goals, challenged him in ways his wife no longer seemed interested in. He told himself it was just friendship, but the time he spent crafting responses to her texts, the small rush he felt when her name lit up his phone, betrayed something deeper. He hadn't crossed the line physically yet, but the emotional tether was undeniable. Their marriage, in truth, was surviving on shadows. Two people under the same roof, hiding secrets in plain sight, both craving what they no longer gave each other. Nights spent scrolling, pretending to sleep, side by side yet worlds apart. Trust had become an unspoken casualty, and routine was the thin glue keeping the facade together. Neither wanted to be the first to admit that something was breaking, so both sought comfort elsewhere, quietly, carefully. For her, Daniel became the forbidden thought she carried into bed. She imagined what it would be like to let his hand stay on hers, to lean into the warmth instead of pulling back. She imagined his voice in her ear, the way he might touch her with the hunger she craved. Those thoughts made her heart race beneath the blankets, while her husband lay inches away, oblivious to the storm she was nurturing inside. She hated herself for wanting it, but the wanting only grew stronger with every encounter. For him, Elena became the mirror he needed. She made him feel younger, stronger, worth listening to. When she asked about his dreams, he realized he hadn't spoken about them in years. With his wife, conversations were practical, functional. With Elena, he felt seen. He found excuses to stay longer at the gym, even when his workouts were done, stretching the minutes into hours because those stolen fragments of connection felt more nourishing than anything waiting for him at home. Neither admitted it out loud, but both knew they were drifting closer to the edge. A point was coming where subtlety would no longer be enough, where unspoken thoughts would demand action. The tension in the air grew thick, unbreakable, and the guilt was no longer a deterrent. Guilt began to feel like part of the ritual, a companion to desire. They didn't stop because part of them no longer wanted to. The most dangerous part of betrayal isn't the moment it happens. It's the long silence before, the justifications, the half-truths you tell yourself to make the impossible seem harmless. She told herself she just needed to feel wanted again. He told himself he just needed someone to remind him he mattered. They convinced themselves it wasn't serious, not yet, nothing that couldn't be erased if they stopped now. But deep down, both of them already knew that lines, once blurred, are never fully redrawn. Their story hadn't reached its breaking point yet, but it was inevitable. Every choice they made in secret was a step toward that collision. A marriage cannot withstand two people living double lives. Trust doesn't survive in shadows. And though they didn't know when or how, they both sensed the reckoning was coming. One night, one truth, and nothing would ever be the same again. Word count 768. Do you want me to move forward and write section 2? Another 760 words, in the same style, picking up the escalation. Got it. Here's section 2 of the Faceless Infidelity script, written in the same tight, direct, no fluff style, with a minimum of 760 words. The shift happened slowly, disguised in the rhythm of ordinary days, until one decision tilted everything out of balance. She lingered longer in conversations with Daniel, their words slipping past work and into personal corners of their lives. What started as comments about long meetings or stressful deadlines turned into confessions about feeling unseen, unappreciated, forgotten. His responses weren't dramatic, but they carried the weight of someone who was actually listening. That kind of attention becomes addictive before you even realize it, and she was already hooked. Every smile he gave her felt like a secret gift, a reassurance she didn't know she had been starving for. Her husband, in turn, was deepening his own secret tether. Elena had become more than just a gym acquaintance. Their chat spilled outside of workouts, filling hours with small messages that made his days brighter. She asked questions his wife never thought to ask anymore, questions that made him reflect, laugh, and feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. When she teased him, when she complimented him, he caught himself replaying her words long after they had left his phone screen. His guilt wasn't strong enough to stop him, it merely sharpened the pleasure. He rationalized it by telling himself it wasn't physical. But desire rarely stays still, it grows, stretches, demands more. For her, the line blurred the day Daniel invited her out for coffee under the guise of a casual break. Sitting across from him outside the office, her pulse raced, not because of what they were doing, but because of what it meant. She laughed too much, leaned in too close, let his gaze linger without breaking it. Every second was a test of self-control she wasn't sure she wanted to pass. She told herself she was still in control, that she could walk away anytime. But the truth was, she had already chosen to stay. At home, the silences grew heavier. She caught her husband smiling at his phone once, and though he quickly hid it, the moment carved a hollow in her chest. She wanted to ask who it was, but didn't, because she knew her own secrets would collapse under the weight of such a question. That unspoken awareness built a fragile truce between them. Don't ask, don't confess, keep pretending. Both were guilty, both complicit, both playing a dangerous game in separate corners of the same house. He began skipping dinners more often, claiming late meetings or longer workouts. She began staying out later herself, blaming traffic or errands. They told themselves these lies were necessary, but the lies only widened the distance. The home became a place of cover stories, not comfort. What bound them together wasn't love anymore, but the routine of marriage, the inertia of shared years. Affection had turned into a shadow, intimacy replaced with secrecy. Her moments with Daniel intensified. The first time his hand stayed too long on hers, she didn't pull back. The electricity of that simple touch sent her spiraling, and though nothing more happened, she carried it like a confession she couldn't speak aloud. Her heart betrayed her every time he leaned close, every time his voice dipped into softness. She began choosing her outfits with him in mind, not her husband, not even herself. Desire reshaped her choices, disguised as ordinary decisions, until everything she did was anchored to him. For her husband, Elena had become more than company, she was temptation in plain sight. He noticed how she adjusted her hair, how she laughed when their eyes met, how she seemed to understand him with effortless ease. He didn't cross the line, but he wanted to. The thought of it played in his head at night, filling the silence where his wife's voice used to be. He fantasized about the what-ifs, the possibilities, the release from the weight of disappointment at home. His longing wasn't for love, but for escape. Both of them told themselves they were victims of neglect, starved of connection in a marriage that had withered. They didn't see that their hunger was driving the very decay they resented. Trust had already eroded, the foundation was fractured. The marriage wasn't destroyed in one moment, but in countless small choices, each one pushing them further apart. She knew she should stop. She knew the thrill of Daniel's attention was dangerous, that every smile, every lingering look was building toward a moment sh.